Well, that is an interesting tune, to say the least. Holy mackerel. I didn't know what to make out of that. I just put in the mood that I wanted was kind of bright and cheery, because this is kind of a celebration to reach this milestone of getting to this point of being able to introduce Nate's CI-21A from 1959. And she is a beauty. Let me see if I can balance these stitches without using my stitch holder. Might have to use my clippers though. And we'll take a look at these stitches. The top row is going to be the second sew off I did, so I should probably turn it upside down. There we go. So the top row now is going to be the first sew off I did through a single layer, and then the second row is going to be the second stitch off I did through 2 layers. Now if you're brand new to this channel and you don't know cow country from a hill of beans, not that there's a whole lot to know about a hill of beans. I mean, it depends on the type of beans, you know what I mean? But if you don't know a lot about this channel, what I just sewed off in the intro to this is none other than genuine elk hide. And genuine elk hide is a chemically processed leather. It's about 4 or 5 ounces thick, a single layer of it. Here we have 2 layers now that I just sewed. So we're looking at about 8 to 10 ounces of leather. And it's a real tough leather to get through, because when they process elk hide, they chemically process it, which galvanizes the surface of that leather to make it more durable. And it really, really makes it tougher to get through. It raises that piercing threshold dramatically. And so again, the first row we did was a single layer. The bottom row is what we did with those 2 layers. Let me do this. Let me put on a little bit more music as we look at this. The first one is called Ya Ya, in case you were really, really curious. So if you ever want to look it up, it's Y-A-H-Y-A-H. Kind of a cool song. The next one is called Just Dance. Just Dance. Let me turn the volume down a little bit. We'll kind of listen to this as I'm introducing a couple of things to you. So once again, top row is our first row. Let's really zero in on that first. Beautiful stitching, beautiful stitching. Let's look at that bottom row now, and that's going to be through our 2 layers of genuine elk hide. Let's look at both of them. So top row again is our first one through a single layer. Our bottom one is through 2 layers of genuine elk hide. So obviously on the back side of this, I put these leathers back to back. There you can kind of see the thickness that we're contending with right there. Folks, that's thicker than what you would expect to find an average. Let me stop moving the camera. I'm going to make you all seasick. That is what you'd expect to see with a men's belt. A men's style belt. Actually, a men's style belt would probably not even be that thick, to be honest with you. It would be probably about 60% of that thickness that we're looking at right there. And again, that's about 8 to 10 ounces of genuine elk hide. And Nate's Husqvarna Viking CI-21A, which, by the way, you may be interested to know this. We're kind of looking at the totality of the stitching now. This CI-21A from 1959 only came with a 1 amp motor. It does not have the 1.5 amp motor that a lot of the 21As had later. And earlier for that matter. They kind of went back and forth. But the point is that this later model, 1959 CI-21A, they ended up stepping the motor down a little bit. But again, when I go through my process of restoring the machine, bobbin to balance wheel, I focus a lot of time, close to about depending on the motor condition, 4.5 hours to 6 hours just on the motor. And this motor was a little bit, as you'll see in the Facebook shots that I'll share, was a little bit on the dirty side. She was a dirty Swedish gal. And so I spent a little bit more time on this motor on Nate's machine. And again, the tricky thing about machines is you can look at the surface of the machine. Again, if I kind of zoom out, I cleaned up the paint a little bit on this machine, but not dramatically. I zoom out, you look at this machine, and if you saw this on Facebook Marketplace, if you saw it on Etsy, if you saw it on eBay, wherever, you'd look at that machine from the outside and you'd go, holy macro, what a looker. She's got to be gorgeous on the inside too. Don't even go down that road. You can't judge a machine by its outer shell. You cannot judge a book by its cover. Both analogies relate, because it's saying don't take on the surface, and assume that that's how it looks on the inside, because that would have been a definite mistake in this case. And this was an original owner machine. This was bought by the owner back in 1959. It was always in that family. It was a cherished machine, but as machines go from the original owner to oftentimes the daughter, the son, then on to grandchildren, depending on even how that machine is stored, it can impact that machine dramatically from a standpoint of how it is going to look on the guts of the machine when I start to surgically dig into that machine, as you'll see in the Facebook shots. And then all of a sudden, the real nature of that machine is revealed. But the good news is, through my restorative process, 126 steps, that machine is better than when it left the factory when I get done with it. And that certainly is true of Nate's machine as well. And you could see that in this initial sew off with that elk hide. Elk hide again being one of the tougher leathers to sew, and yet this CI-21A from 1959 did just a phenomenal job. Now let's really put the proof where the pudding is. Turn it around and look at that lock stitch. Again, look at the thickness of what we went through. I'm going to turn it around, and now we'll finally look at that lock stitch and be able to get a feeling for how this machine did, because that lock stitch is always going to be a tougher job for the machine because of the sheer kinetic factor of that thread. After that needle pierces that material, that thread having to work its way all the way back up through about 10 ounces of leather. Imagine that. I mean, that thread is on the bottom of this leather, and that needle and the kinetic energy is going to pull that thread all the way back up top to complete that lock stitch. That is a fury of activity happening in microseconds. And the nature of that machine and how it's performing is going to drive that process dramatically. You're going to be able to tell right away, okay, how did the machine do? Let's look at the lock stitch. I'm just going to say it. Page 34, folks. Page 34, a lock stitch coming back through 2 layers of genuine elk hide, about, well, you can see on the top there again, about 10 ounces of leather, folks. Look at that. That is leather that just says, yeah, bring it, bring it. And yet Nate's CI-21A, let's look at the totality of the stitching as well. Nate's CI-21A with a 1 amp motor, not a 1.5, got this job done so easily. It was almost ridiculous. And I was only about, gosh, maybe what, 15% of the way down on the foot controller as far as giving the machine power. So I wasn't even tapping into that 1 amp motor and saying, hey, let's hit it hard. We just dove into it like, let's just get it done. Let's just get it done. No sweat, no big deal. Not a big hoopla here. That is the difference right there between a machine that has gone through my process that takes about 16 hours compared to taking it to your local sewing center. And again, I love supporting local businesses. I love supporting local businesses, but you take it there, they're going to spend about 30 to 45 minutes on it if you're lucky. They're not going to do any of the things that you see me do to the machine, which are absolutely essential and critical to optimizing that machine so it runs at the top of its game, so it runs better than when it left the factory. Again, when you're dealing with a factory, even a factory in Sweden, where they are meticulous about their process, they cannot belabor the process if they're going to be getting those machines down the assembly line and getting them out the door. There will be spots that they will forget to lubricate. There will be worm gear assemblies that are not greased. And there will be other areas of the machine that somehow they'll miss the beat. You've heard about it. You buy a car on a Friday or on a Thursday, you're going to get lesser of a car than if you buy it on a Monday or Tuesday. It's the mindset of the maker at the factory. Is their head looking towards the weekend and not fully engaged? Or are they now back from a weekend refreshed, ready to jump into the grind of things, doing something they probably love doing? So that can even impact the caliber of that machine when it leaves the factory, whether it's a Husqvarna Viking or whether it's a Singer or whether it's a Brother or whether it's a Juki, whatever it is. The fact of the matter is my process takes the time that they can't take even at the factory to make sure that every fraction of that machine is brought to the top of its game so it will perform better than machines leaving the factory. Had we been able to stand at the factory door back in 1959 and they handed us a machine that just finished the getting down the line, they did the stitch offs, they did all the things they were going to do, I would match that machine against one of mine any day of the week, and I think I would beat it hands down. Stitch quality, strength, power at the needle, punch at the needle, everything. I'm that confident about my process, folks, and that's why folks like Nate and others will bypass a number of different options and reach all the way out to the workshop and say, I want it from the workshop. And that's exactly what Nate said. He said, I can't wait to sew on a machine that came out of your workshop. They're the best in the world. Probably like the pottery that Nate and his family do over there in Minneapolis, Minnesota with Saunders Pottery.
is probably the best in the world. And pottery, like a lot of those treasures that people make by hand, and I highlighted that recently on Facebook. It was National Make It By Your Hand Day sort of thing. And I pointed right at Nate's business and I said, hey, here you go. Because that is also, along with sewing machines being heirloom quality, like the one I just finished for Roz that went to Michigan. Pottery is another area that people will, I mean, you've heard of it, Ming Dynasty, all that kind of stuff. Pottery is another wonderful way to leave a legacy behind. And that's what Nate and his family are doing with their business over there in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Yep, no doubt. So at any rate, Nate, if you're at this premiere and you're able to join the chat, by all means, if you feel this is a page 34 on 2 layers of genuine elk hide, then go ahead and type that into the chat. If you're not able to join the chat, you don't see Nate pop on the radar, then you all can jump in and you can indicate whether or not you believe it's a page 34. I certainly do. So I'm going to throw it to the rear and give it a definite pass as far as the caliber of stitching. Again, as impressive as these 2 layers of genuine elk hide are, this is not demonstrating the max of what Nate's machine can do. Not even close. But that's not the point of the premieres. The point of the premieres is this right here. To show a diverse field of sew-off materials and the fact that this machine consistently can deliver a page 34 type stitch. That's the goal. But again, look at it from the side. That just gives you an idea of what an optimized Swedish Beauty can do. There are CI-21As probably made in the same model year of 1959. There's no way in God's green earth that they could complete this sew-off, especially not with a page 34 stitch like Nate's machine just did. So again, apples and oranges, folks, when it comes to machines, even if it's the same make, the same model year. Don't be deceived. Do not be tricked into thinking that all machines are equal. They're not even, you know, what I've said in the past is as soon as they leave the factory, they're not equal anymore. The truth of the matter is, as I've already alluded to in some of my other remarks, they're not even equal when they leave the factory, because there are individual workers touching those during different phases of their work week, and things are missed. Even with QA standards, things are missed. So that again is the beauty of having this workshop and my specific process that no one else in the world uses, to take Swedish beauties like Nate's or any of the machines that come to the workshop and give them an opportunity to shine brighter than they otherwise ever would, even leaving the showroom floor of the factory. I don't know if there's actually a showroom floor in the original Swedish factory that made the Husqvarnas. I'm not sure. But if there was, I would put one of my machines against it any day of the week. And that's the cool thing about having a process that continues to get better and better and better. When I started my process, it didn't have 126 steps. Probably had about 40 steps. And then I continued to improve my process over the years. And now it's all the way up to 126. So 126 may not be the stopping point. I eventually might have 127, 128, 129, 130. You just never know. Because again, I'm committed to something called the CANI principle, C-A-N-I. If you're a really good student and you've been paying attention, type into the chat, what does CANI stand for? C-A-N-I. And while you're doing that, and I'm not looking at the chat, I'm going to go ahead and put on some more music. And we'll go ahead and jump into some more sew-offs with this. Also, I'm going to show you a couple other things as well. As a matter of fact, let me change my shot. As beautiful of a shot as this is, we'll zoom over here and kind of look on these bobbins, and I'll talk a little bit about why do I have all these bobbins sitting out here? What's that about? But first of all, some more music. So that last music piece was Just Dance. Before that was Ya Ya. And now the next one is called Fast and Run. Fast and Run. Fast and Run. I somehow just flashed to the movie Forrest Gump, when he's running out of his driveway, his mama's house, and he's starting to go on that long journey of his run. Yeah, at any rate, I don't know why. Fast and run. Fast and run. Yeah. I'm going to get a quick drink. Oh, that's right. He did do those already. I'm just going to show these as well. Matter of fact, I'll use my stitch off holder for this. These I did off camera, and I showed these on Facebook as well. And we're going to be duplicating some of these from cam letter C. I'm going to have to put them up here because they're not sitting level. And then my bed is so slippery because I waxed it. Oh, this is a hoot. Let me do it like that. That's close enough. And if you do Facebook, you've already seen these stitches. And these stitches on this piece of genuine cowhide, I believe this is cowhide. Let me go back over here. These stitches represent cams A, B, and C that are going to be, I'm going to do totality first, that are going to be going with Nate's machine. And by the way, if you really have been hoping and praying to get a Swedish Beauty from the workshop, let me kind of zoom in on these a little bit. Well, that's also a straight stitch on top as well, and a zigzag. I just think the stitch patterns that come off of those cams for the Husqvarnas are just spectacular, don't you? Just spectacular. And I'll just turn it around. You won't be able to see it real well, but I always talk about the lock stitch, and the lock stitch is just as spectacular. Kind of hard to stand up a piece of leather that tall, you know? The profile of it. And the totality of stitching. Beautiful job. Beautiful job. All right, let's go on to the next sew-off. No, actually, let's not go to the next sew-off. Let's go over to the bobbins first. Let's go over to the bobbins first. Now, I'll tell you a little story about bobbins. If you have a Husqvarna Viking green machine like this, and you're needing more bobbins for it, there are a lot of options out there. There are a lot of options out there. And not all of them are good options for your machine, just so you know. And they will vary in thousandths of an inch as far as the circumference of the bobbin, the inner portion of the bobbin that will slide into the bobbin case, and then also the style of the bobbin, and even the material composition of the bobbin. Everything from aluminum over here to different grades of metal in how they process it, to bobbins that have all these holes in it, almost like you would see on a featherweight bobbin, or you might see on some of the class 15 bobbins, to a more of a flat profile bobbin like this that's going to have a little groove in it that you really don't need because of the bobbin winder on this machine, and then a standard Husqvarna bobbin like this one. Now all of them are going to be real close on dimensions. All of them are going to be real close. I'll go ahead and, well, first of all, I'll show you. Here's our aluminum one. You can tell right away that's our aluminum one because it's not responding to the magnet. All the other ones are metal. That one is metal. This is a strong magnet. That's metal. Metal. And last but not least, metal.
So talking a little bit about aluminum. Aluminum is obviously about 33% lighter than steel. So this bobbin is going to weigh about 33% less than these other bobbins. Except for this one right here that has all the holes in it. That one will probably be a little bit lighter than these other three right here. But the thing about aluminum is because of the way they process and cast it, it can even have unevenness in the material composition of the bobbin. In other words, it's not going to be the particulate value of this bobbin on the far right is not going to have the same weight distribution consistency that the metal ones will, because of the particulate composition of it is tighter on steel, which is why it's heavier, if that makes sense. So when you're dealing with aluminum, what you can run into is you can run into issues with it not spinning as true. When it's working its way around spinning inside of that bobbin case at a high rate of speed, it'll get a slight wobble to it that you won't be able to see, obviously, because it's down below in the raceway. But that'll cause issues with sometimes stitch quality. It'll cause issues with how that thread is feeding. It'll even sometimes, in a more catastrophic way, will cause issues with thread breaks, because as that thread is being distributed off of the bobbin, it's not evenly flowing, and it'll cause kind of pauses and jerks as that thread is coming off of that bobbin rather rapidly. So I do not recommend the aluminum ones, even though they're tempting to have because they don't rust. As you have bobbins in your machine and you have them in your sewing space, even if you maintain the humidity in that space pretty well, you can still have issues sometimes with surface rust developing on the bobbins. So this is a tempting proposition, but when it comes to the way that it performs in the machine, I'm not a strong believer in aluminum. And they do sell these for these models on eBay and other places. And if you're one of those sellers, I'm sorry, but I'm all about let's get the best product from the machine, and aluminum does not do that consistently. Now, if you put a heavier thread on the aluminum, maybe more of an upholstery grade thread, that'll be less of a factor because there'll be more density on that center core of the bobbin, and it's probably going to perform a little bit more evenly and consistent like these metal versions. So on the bobbin number 2 that has this little notch in it, there's really no point in having this notch for a CI-21A, because it's not like a traditional bobbin winder where you've got to slide that bobbin into place and it has to meet up with a little dimple, kind of a little divot on the other end, and then it kind of snaps into place, and that kind of keeps it from spinning unevenly as you're winding it. You don't need that on this machine. And you certainly don't need this one with all the holes in it either. This is really kind of a bizarre version of some of the people selling bobbins that they say are compatible with the Husqvarna Vikings. And I've seen people using these too, and there's just no point in having the holes. I mean, other than visibility of seeing what thread level you're at or how much thread you have left on the bobbin without having to remove it. That makes it probably a little bit easier. And this is a different type of metal with that same little notch in it that you really don't need. You can see the look of this metal compared to this metal here that is highly shined. And again, the material composition of these, I have no idea how much, metal and metal ore substitutes they put into their material building of these bobbins, but they're going to vary all the way across. And then finally we have this one, which is a standard metal bobbin that I recommend most for the Husqvarnas. It doesn't have all those funky holes in it like a featherweight bobbin. It doesn't have the little notch that's not needed. It's just a flat profile bobbin that fits that bobbin case perfectly. And if you're curious about dimensions, so you can compare it to someone selling on eBay or otherwise, if I measure it like this, yeah, you can see that. You're looking at 9 millimeters in vertical profile on the bobbin. If we rotate it like this as far as height, it's going to be right around 21 millimeters. And then that inner core, which is essential, because otherwise it will spin unevenly if that core is too large, and it won't go in if it's too small. It's going to be right around 8 millimeters. Actually, I've got that moved a little bit. Let me do that a little bit tighter. Correction, right around 6 millimeters. I had that on the outer side of that hole, and it should be on the inner side. So right around 6 millimeters are the general dimensional measurements for the bobbins. Now, if you want to try the aluminum ones because you're sewing with a heavier thread, then go for it. Give it a try. See what you get. See what you get as far as consistency. If you want to try one of these with a notch, that the notch really doesn't do anything, then go ahead and do that. If you want to try the featherweight style one, you can try that. If you want to try this one that's made out of a slightly different metal composition, it's less shiny, it's more of a dull metal finish. So that would indicate that the way they process it or the material composition of it is going to be different than this one. 2 and 4 are going to be real similar, but they're slightly different in the type of metal used. Then, try it out. I'm just giving my recommendation. So anyway, quick little tutorial on bobbins. So I'm going to move these out of the way. Oh, I could almost do that. Look at that. I got the 3. 3 is right on the edge, but my magnet isn't quite strong enough to get the 4th one. Can I still do it? Can I do it somehow? Yes! Oh, bummer. Hold on. I'm determined. It's a silly determination, but there's all 4. Where is it? There it is. All right. Yes, I'm entertained easily. All right, let me move that to the side. And I'll move all of these bobbins to the side. And I'm going to be sending the one that I recommended most. I'll be sending several of those with Nate's machine, so he's all set to do the sewing that he wants to do. Okay, so what should we sew next? What we should do, first of all, is get some music to inspire us. So Fast and Run is the one we just did. Now we're going to be doing Trickling Up. Trickling Up. Trickling Up. Okay, so let's see. And if any of you are curious, because you sometimes will ask me this, as if this is the determining factor, which it's not. Well, Scott, what kind of needle did you use for that sew-off? Or what type of thread did you use for that sew-off? I get it. You're curious. But just realize again that the 126-step process is what drives the outcome of what this machine can do, not the type of thread or needle. I mean, to the greater extent. So the type of needle I have in the machine today is a Schmetz size 90 universal needle, which means it's designed to handle a wide variety of material types. Anything from leather to upholstery material, you name it, it's supposed to be able to handle it because of the design, the engineering of the needle itself. So we're going to be putting that to the test with a wide field of sew-offs today as we begin that process. Now what I'd like to demonstrate next is, let's see what else I have here. I've got some of this vegan style leather. I think this is some of the vegan, no it's not. This is a vinyl material. I didn't grab any of the vegan leather this time. This is more of a vinyl type material, and I called it sometimes the bubblegum material because as you change the camera shot, you can actually see what I'm talking about. Yeah, that would be helpful. So what I was going to show you is, I call this the bubblegum material because it is a vinyl composition, almost looks like leather. And it might have a little bit of leather in it, but it's kind of like that vegan leather where it's definitely not 100% leather. But I call it the bubblegum material because look at the stretch on this stuff. Especially here when you take it from the side. See that? That's why I call it the bubblegum material. So this stuff is real tricky to work with, especially to get a good solid lock stitch, because the vinyl again is going to resist that thread coming back up. So I'm going to put this into position. We're going to sew around the field of this and lay down a straight stitch, and then we'll go across the middle with a zigzag. And the wider you go with a zigzag on a stretchy type material or a dense material, the harder it is for that zigzag to be, or that zigzag style stitch to be completed, because of the material resisting that thread completing its cycle of that stitch, whatever it is. It could be a decorative stitch, it could be a zigzag stitch, but anything that has needle swing is going to raise the stakes quite a bit on that. So we'll start on the easy side with a straight stitch, and we'll see how Nate's machine does on this super tricky bubblegum style material. All right, and we'll go with total silence so that no one can no one can fuss about noise in the background. All right, here we go. All right, so let me rotate that needle down manually. We'll turn it here. We'll go around the edge. Almost went too far. All right, now let's go down. Again, listen to this machine operate. Listen to this machine operate. Here we go. See, I did really well up until that point, and then I got a little bit of a pucker at the end because I wasn't managing that material effectively. Let me see if I can smooth it out a little bit and cover up my mistake a little bit. I don't think I'm going to be able to do that. Nope. Oh, well. Well, we gave it a try anyway. I tried to cover it up. But numerous folks have always said, you know, we love the fact that you don't edit things out. If there's a mistake, if you glitch something, if you mess it up, you just show us that, and hey, it is what it is. So now we're going to do a kind of an X on this using a zigzag. Again, a zigzag is going to be a tougher thing to deliver for this machine because of the fact that it is going to be a needle swing type stitch that we're going to be laying down. So now we're going to try to do a zigzag across this, and we'll go across the other side as well. And sometimes if you're doing a wider zigzag, you're going to want to increase your upper tension so that you've got a little bit more pull on that thread coming back up to complete that lock stitch. So that's what I'm going to do off camera right now. I'm just going to bump up my upper tension a little bit so that it's able to complete that zigzag more easily as far as the lock stitch. Okay, here we go. And I'll get my take-up arm all the way up. Oh, I see what I did. Oops. I actually have it set on a decorative stitch pattern right now. And so I did not get the zigzag that I wanted, but it's still needle swing. So this is not going to look like a zigzag. It's going to be actually stitch number 1 on cam C, but the stitch length is set so long it's not going to be representative of what that decorative stitch would normally look like. And we'll just continue with that since I already started and I forgot to set it on position 5, which would be the zigzag. Again, if you're brand new to Husqvarna's, on the black cams that go inside of these machines, the Swedish engineered the cams so that in position 5 you're always going to have a zigzag. And I had it in position 1, which is one of the decorative outputs for cam C. So that's why it looks like it looks. And now I'm going to try to go over my ripple at the end, which will make it even more fun. So let's see what happens. Here we go. It actually helped me kind of flatten that ripple down a little bit so it doesn't look as bad now. All right, so let me clip these threads and we'll take a look at these real quick, okay? We'll take a look at these and see how these turned out. This actually looks kind of fun. It almost looks like a quilt panel or a quilt block, more of a simple quilt block with the way that it's turned out. And I'll try to lean this against the machine so we can look at both sides. And obviously the side that has the pucker is going to be my top side, so that my mistake makes it easier for us to distinguish which side to put up. And I think I might use my stitch off holder that Maddie sent me on this one. Although this bubblegum material is kind of hard to get to lay evenly. I'm going to bend these posts back a little bit. Yeah, that's not going to work. This stuff is just really tricky to... I'll just kind of tuck it in there as best as I can. Oh boy. I'll turn it sideways. Maybe that'll be easier. We'll put our pucker down. It's the only problem with this bubblegum material is it is so hard, and along with the fact that I waxed the bed, so the material's trying to slide, the clips are trying to slide. But let's take a look at this. Again, I was aiming for a zigzag in the middle, doing that X, but I didn't get it because I ended up having the stitch selector in the wrong position. So there we'll look at it. We're kind of looking at it from the totality standpoint first. It really is quite spectacular. The straight stitching, if we go around the edges a little bit, on a real tricky bubblegum style material, 2 layers of it are just absolutely spot on. We'll kind of go around the outside and look at those first as best as we can. There the material is kind of collapsing down a little bit, but we'll pick up the stitches on this side again. And those are definitely page 34 stitches, folks. Especially on a material as tricky as this bubblegum material. And now we'll look at that. Again, I've got cam C in the back of the machine right now, and I've got the selector on position 1. So we'll probably sew this again later on another piece of leather that I have. I think it's Italian leather, and we'll go through all of these stitches on cam C. But again, this is a needle swing type stitch, and Nate's machine just did a fabulous job. We'll kind of come down this side now and look at these as well. So that's a definite success. I'll come out here, we can look at the totality of the stitching again, and then I'll turn it around and we can look at that lock stitch, because that lock stitch is really going to tell us the story as to how this CI-21A, I got to untie my tongue today, how this CI-21A did in managing a very difficult material. So I'm going to turn it around now. We'll look at these. This is now our lock stitch. And because the material is kind of curving back a little bit, we're able to see the stitching on this lock stitch even better than we were the top stitch. So let's take a look at these. So there's our totality right there. Just going to move this over a little bit because that light is kind of making it hard to see that. Yeah, once I set the stitch length down to about 0.5 and do that same stitch that's creating that X on this block right now, it's going to look totally different. Because right now it's too long. So this again is our lock stitch, 2 layers of this bubblegum material, super stretchy stuff, real vinyl, intense, and that stitching is just absolutely spot on. Absolutely spot on. So my presser foot pressure must be adequate to handle this because it's showing the evidence of that with this lock stitch. If you were getting a lot of stubby stitching and it were uneven, then that would indicate you're probably not getting the necessary feed. Even these, this modified stitch number 1 on cam C that I did mistakenly is presenting really, really well. Really, really well. Just look at those stitches. That's why I say page 34. Let's go across and look at these other stitches that we brought down for the other X.
Just absolutely spot on. Go back up this way now. So again, the reason that I do such a diverse field of materials is to really test this machine. This is one of the tougher sew-offs that we're going to do. Some of you might have, when we did those 2 layers of genuine alkyd, you might have, been dropping your jaw and going, "Wow, that's incredible! That really demonstrates how well the machine is sewing." It does, but when you're dealing with a slippery, stretchy material like this bubblegum material, 2 layers of it, and we can lay down stitching like this. This again is our lock stitch. We can lay down stitching like this to this degree, to this caliber, to a page 34 level. It just gives you an idea of how beautifully this machine is running right now. So I'm really impressed by this sew off, more so than anything else we've done, or anything that I've done off camera. You know, between this lock stitch and this top stitch as well, just absolutely spot on. Absolutely spot on. So I'm going to throw this to the back. Our 2 layers of bubblegum material, which is really kind of a vinyl composition type material, but it's real tricky stuff. So what next? Maybe some compressed felt. Let me find another piece of music. We'll do some compressed felt. I've got a variety of other materials over here as well. I've got some of my acrylic fiber. I've got some of my commercial grade upholstery material. I've got all kinds of goodies over here, along with the sew-offs that I already did off camera. So that was called Tricking Up. This next one is called The World's Fair. The World's Fair. I don't know. I've never done research to find out if Husqvarna, certainly not back in 1872 when they first started rolling their machines out, but I wonder if Husqvarna ever featured any of their machines at a World's Fair. If anyone wants to do some research on that and come back to us at the next premiere and let us know what you found out, or if you can do some quick research right now and let us know what you found out, that would be super cool. But obviously, we all know that in 1934, Singer took advantage of the Chicago World's Fair and presented its featherweight 221 at that time. All right, the World's Fair. Doesn't sound like a World's Fair, but maybe. All right, let's do some of this compressed felt. I'm going to go ahead and go to our 3 layers like we normally do. Which, if you want to know what that looks like, that's what 3 layers of compressed felt looks like. Along with my little cut here. Probably show you the other end. And those of you that follow me faithfully know that during one of my premieres, sewing this very material, the same thickness that I'm sewing today, I actually snapped a needle comparable to the one that I have in the machine today, a Schmetz Universal, I believe it was a size 90 or 100, and ended up snapping that needle. So it just gives you an idea that this compressed felt is a lot tougher than most people would give credit to it for. All right, so let's try this out now. Get this into position. Drop down that presser foot. I think our presser foot pressure should be adequate. And again, your presser foot adjustment is going to be inside of the faceplate on the Husqvarna, the same place you'll find the serial number. Yeah, I'm going to leave that the way it is. So I'm going to go back to a straight stitch, and we'll go around the outer edge of this. The other thing I'll do real quick is I'm going to change this back to a zigzag so I can remember to demonstrate that as well. Okay, so here we go, 3 layers of compressed felt, and we're going to be doing a simple straight stitch around the edges, and then I might add a zigzag to it because we missed our zigzag on that last one because I had my stitch selector in the wrong place. And if you're wondering about when I say stitch selector, what is that all about?
I'll see if I can walk us around the machine right after this sew off, and I'll kind of point out those features on the machine if you're new to Swedish Beauties. All right, here we go. 3 layers of compressed felt. This always makes me a little bit nervous because it's the only material I can think of that I was sewing on camera and it snapped a Schmetz needle. It was almost like irreverent that it happened because my Schmetz needles are sacred. They really are. All right, here we go. Now, did you see that little pause because I didn't give it enough gas? It just gives you an idea. It gives you an idea of how tough this compressed felt is. It actually caused the machine to pause a little bit, and that was my fault because I didn't give it enough gusto to launch into it. There, I gave it too much gusto. But again, I'll say this, you don't need a 1.5 amp motor with a Swedish Beauty to get the job done. You just don't. All right, let's go down to the finish. And I'm not going to close the box. Just leave that the way it is. And I can see by the stitching is beautiful, but it's a little bit compressed, that I could benefit if I were sewing a ton of this compressed felt. I could benefit from increasing the presser foot pressure just a little bit, and or looking at a modified presser foot attachment instead of this standard universal one that I have on there right now. Presser feet over time will get a little bit glazed on the bottom. They get a little bit smooth, kind of slippery. And in working with the feed dogs, they do not deliver that feed as well as they could when they were brand new. It just happens. They just start to wear down, especially if people are careless and they end up running the machine with the presser foot down and no material in between there as a buffer between the feed dogs and the bottom of the presser foot. That's a big no-no. Never do that. Never ever do that. So let's look at this top stitch first. Hoping we'll be able to see it. I'm kind of smoothing this out. We'll be able to see it clearly enough. And then we'll look at the lock stitch. Again, 3 layers of compressed felt makes me more anxious, more nervous than if I'm sewing leather because of how tricky this stuff is. So let's start to look at this stitching across the top. Absolute gorgeous stitching, folks. Spot on. But again, a little bit compressed, which tells me that our presser foot pressure, and or we need to look at, if we were sewing a ton of this stuff, we need to be looking at putting a roller foot on here maybe, and or increasing that presser foot pressure. Maybe both. But the stitch quality is definitely page 34, folks. Absolutely bang on. Absolutely bang on. All right, so let me come out of the shot. We'll look at the totality of the stitching, which is going to be a little bit hard to see, depending on how you're viewing this premiere. If you're viewing it on a smaller device, it'll be a little bit more challenging to see, possibly. I'm looking at it through my little window on the camera right now, so I mean I can see the stitching, but it's tiny because of the distance we have to back up. Maybe on your screen it's absolutely clear, which is cool. So I'm going to turn it around now. We'll look at the lock stitch. Again, the lock stitch is going to be more difficult for us to complete because of pulling that thread through those 3 layers of compressed felt. It's a very dense weave on this material because of the compression process they use to make it, and so it really resists that thread coming back through. See, again, from the edge there are 3 layers. You can see right away it's not an easy sew off at all. Start to move across and look at the stitching. Definitely at page 34. And again, the only thing I would do different is I would probably, if
I were sewing a bunch of this stuff, I would look at adding a different presser foot attachment and or increasing presser foot pressure so that this slippery stuff with that dense weave is going to be pressed into those feed dogs even harder to make sure that it's feeding evenly. But even in spite of that, we got a page 34 stitch all the way around this tricky stuff that again in another premiere snapped a size, I believe it was a size 90. I said size 90 or size 100. I believe it was a size 90 Schmetz universal needle. Snapped it right in half sewing this same material. So very impressive sew off. Very pleased with this. I'm going to go ahead and throw that to the back as a pass as well, along with our genuine elk hide and our bubblegum material. And again, these sew-offs always go to the customer. So these are going to go to Nate over in Minneapolis, and he'll have a chance to check him out himself, you know, see what he thinks, and maybe even sew them again. A lot of my customers will put them underneath the presser foot and replicate the same sew-off that they've seen me do. So that's kind of cool too. You know, the other thing I talked about doing and I didn't do it, let me bring this back into the shot, is I talked about doing a zigzag down the middle of this. So why don't we do that real quick? I want to fulfill that zigzag so it's not bothering me that I missed it on that other sew-off. Look at that. Isn't that crazy? That stuff is super tricky to sew, folks. If you really want to test your machine at home, get yourself some compressed felt and go through 2 or 3 layers. Here we're doing 3 layers is what we did. But do 2 or 3 layers and put your machine to the test. See how it does. Let me know. I'd love to hear a story about another machine being able to deliver at this level. That would be super cool. All right, so let's buzz down this and do a real zigzag this time. And we'll see what we think of this. Seeing if I'm going to modify my stitch length a little bit. Yeah, I think I'll bring stitch length to about 3.5, and our stitch width is going to be right around 3 as far as the width of the zigzag we're doing. All right, let's give this a go. Let me get my take-up arm all the way up, and we'll go down this material. Again, 3 layers of compressed felt. Here we go. Yeah, I can tell that that material is feeding well, but with a little bit of increase in presser foot pressure, it would do even a better job. So now we actually got something more representative of a zigzag, and I'll be able to show that to you instead of that decorative stitch that we just totally decimated by not having the stitch length much shorter. But we'll redo it again. We'll make it right. Okay, so first of all, yeah, that's the bottom. First of all, let's look at the zigzag on top. Take a look at that zigzag. And this is not the largest zigzag that the machine can do. I kind of made it a little bit shorter, in part because it kind of makes it even more intense. It makes it more challenging. Folks, that's page 34. That's a page 34 zigzag right there. And that's an extra little piece of lint there on that stitch. That's not anything wrong with the stitch. All right, let me come out on this shot, and we'll look at the totality of the stitching, and then I'm going to turn it over and we'll look at that lock stitch. Get that little piece of fuzz off of there. There we go. So let's turn around now, look at that lock stitch. This is our lock stitch for that modified zigzag that we just did. Again, if you want to replicate this on your machine, the settings that I used for this zigzag is 3 on stitch width, and the length is set right around 3.5. The length is right around 3.5 if you want to replicate it on your machine. So this is again our zigzag on the rear of the machine, which again is going to be a little bit tougher for the machine to do it successfully because of that factor of pulling that thread back up through the material, through 3 layers of this compressed felt. And yet Nate's machine, wow, all of the stitching it did on this very tricky material, this compressed felt, is just absolutely spot on. Look at both of those, all 3 of those rows now. That is some beautiful stitching, folks. We'll come out and look at the totality of the stitching again. This is our lock stitch for these 3 layers of compressed felt. So I'm going to give this a pass as well and throw this to the rear. And we'll move on to our next sew off after I pick out some more music and wipe the bed off as well. Okay, so the last one we just did is called the World's Fair. It didn't sound like the World's Fair to me at all, but maybe it did to you. And then the next one is called To Ponder. To Ponder. Yeah, it sounds like pondering music. Or like an episode to the Twilight Zone, maybe. So I think the next one we'll do is upholstery material. The next one we probably will do is upholstery material. Although I could take an interlude and we could do some decorative stitching on that that Italian leather that I have. It's a blue Italian leather. That might be kind of fun. Why don't we do that? Why don't we take a little break and we'll do some decorative sewing with this machine. Let me turn this music down. And the first stitch that I'll do is a zigzag because that's one of the stitches on the cam in position 5. All right, I'll just leave the shot like this. I think that's pretty good. You know what? Another thing I mentioned I was going to do and I did not do it. Let me do this even first because otherwise I'll forget. So starting right here next to this incredible badge mark, and again, if you don't know the history of the Husqvarna sewing factory over in Sweden, that started making machines right around 1872. It came as a result of a decree given by the King of Sweden, which is, we represent the King of Sweden right here, right, Your Majesty? That's why if you're new to this channel and you go, what's with the frog? Well, this frog represents King Gustavus Adolphus II, who was the King of Sweden that issued that decree to establish a factory that initially was making it was a drilling and grinding plant, and they also made musket barrels, but then right around 1872, they started making the first Husqvarna sewing machines. So then that's all a result of the King's decree, which is why all of the machines that you'll see from Husqvarna are going to have this really cool crown crest on the front of the machines proudly displayed. Sometimes it's over here. Sometimes it's on the front of the machine right over here next to that badge mark. But that's what that crown is all about. So now the controls a little bit. Let's look at the controls. This little knob on the bottom is going to allow you to drop feed dogs for free motion quilting. If you just turn that dot clockwise from the 12 o'clock position that it's at right now down to the 6 o'clock position, the feed dogs will drop. It'll allow you to do free motion quilting. And then when you rotate that knob back counterclockwise to the 12 o'clock position again, those feed dogs will be in the full up position to move the material. Right above it, and I had referred to this a couple of times during the premiere, this is our stitch width controller. Our stitch width controller is going to give us a range of 0 to 4. Obviously, if we're on 0, it's going to give us a straight stitch. If we're between 1 and 4, it's going to give us a stitch width accordingly, whether it's for a zigzag or one of the decorative stitches. And then this little tab, which is a little bit hard to see on top of here, that little silver tab is a tab that allows you to set start and stop points for making buttonholes with the machine. That's what that is all about, and it describes that process a little bit inside of the manual as well. This right up here is our stitch length controller, and also our reverse in the middle. This CI-21A is going to have a quick release on the reverse. In other words, you're going to have to push it in and hold it when you're sewing in reverse, and then when you release it, you'll resume sewing in front again, or forward again, I should say. Some of the machines that Husqvarna made, some of the Type 21s, I believe also some of the 19 series as well, will have a two-stage reverse button where you'll push the reverse in, like so, and when you go to release it, it'll stay in, and then you'll have to push it a second time to release it. So it's called a two-stage reverse. And some people like that because they're kind of bothered by the fact that if you want to sew something in reverse for back tacking purposes, you've got to hold the button in, where the other two-stage design, you push it in, it stays, you push it again, it releases. Other people hate it, so it's kind of like two camps. One loves it, one hates it. But again, with stitch length up here, we're going to be able to go anywhere from 4, which is going to be giving us the largest stitch length, all the way down to, I mean, you could go all the way to 0, but that's totally impractical because then your material's not going to be moving at all. And typically for decorative sewing with the cam output, you're going to be going right around 0.5, maybe slightly below that is the best setting in most instances for the cams. Then if we go to the control just to the right, to the left of that, I should say, where I made that one mistake where we made the X on the, I think it was the bubblegum material, and I ended up doing a modified decorative stitch instead of the zigzag that I wanted. It's because I had this slider all the way to the front in position 1. Right now it's in position 5, which gives us a zigzag. So basically, you can't see it on this side, but on the other side, it's going to be labeled 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 being the stitch control that's furthest in on the slider, and then as you bring it out, you can slide between 5 to 4 to 3 to 2 to 1. And each time you cycle this to change the slider position, I always recommend, and I'll widen the shot a little bit to show you if you haven't seen this before, I always recommend that you recycle it using the stitch width. And what I mean by that is, because this is a gear release design, if you try to go from 5 to 4 right now, it's going to be stuck because there's a gear and a finger engaged into that cam. If you recycle it by taking this to 0, you should be able to slide the cam slider into the next position just like I did, to position 4, and then you can take your stitch width back to 4 again. Now if I want to go to the next one, instead of forcing it, because it won't move right now, I take it back to 0, and then I can move this slider into position 3. You do your stitch off, you recycle it again, take it to position 2, move your stitch width back to do your stitch, recycle it down to 0 again, and then finally you take it to stitch position 1 to do your final stitch. Okay, does that make sense? So it just kind of recalibrates the machine and it releases that mechanism in the back so that this slider will move more freely. I've had people actually break a slider by trying to force it, which is definitely something you don't want to do. So just take that extra time to recycle your stitch width, move your slider, move your stitch width back into position, whether it's to 4 or 3 or 2 or wherever you want it, and then you'll be able to make those changes with your cam output without breaking your machine. That's a good day, isn't it? Yeah, we don't want to break the machine. The other thing, I'll kind of widen my shot even more now. The other thing that I'll show you real quick is I've gotten questions in the past about needle position. Because I'll explain that this control right here does a couple of things. It allows you to access the cams through the slider. It allows you to adjust needle position. But it depends on where you have the stitch width. In other words, I have the stitch width right now on 0, that needle position is going to respond properly. You see the needle down here, you'll see it move. Right position, center position, left position. So this control does what it's supposed to do, assuming you have the stitch width on 0 or near to 0. As soon as you move the stitch width anywhere from about 1 to 4, you lose control of needle position, because the machine then overrides your decision of saying, well, I want to go left or right. The machine says, no, you're on stitch width right now, which is telling the machine to do needle swing, whether it's a decorative stitch or whether it's a zigzag, and you can't override that. So if we try to change needle position now, you'll notice that the needle doesn't move. I moved it to the left, the needle didn't move. Move it back to the center, the needle doesn't move. Move it to the right, the needle doesn't move. And that's where the question has come in a couple times. People unwittingly have thought that their machine was broken. Some even took it to a service center and paid a lot of money when there was nothing wrong with their machine at all, other than they had their stitch width set above 0, and so that needle position function was being overridden by the mechanics of the machine. Now I moved it back to 0 again. All of a sudden our needle position works again. So don't pay a service center to fix what doesn't need to be fixed. Just know the operation of your machine and you'll be in great shape. Now what I'm going to do real quick is jump into some more sew-offs, I think, and I think we'll do some decorative sew-offs. So what I'm going to do is I'll just show you in preparation for doing some decorative sew-offs, and right now we've got our slider on position 5, which is perfect. That's going to give us a zigzag. But I've got to change a couple other things as well. So let's do this. I'm going to move our stitch width over to 3. I won't go quite to 4. And then I'm going to move my stitch length from 4 down to about 3. So that'll be our first stitch off on this Italian leather that I've prepared. And I don't even know that I need a piece that big. Do I? Probably not. Because I'm going to be doing five stitches only. 5 stitches. So I'll see if I can shorten it a little bit and save this leather piece, this one little strip, for another sew-off in the future. Because even though this is, many of you know I get this from a manufacturer that makes seats for Lear jets and stuff. They use this leather to upholster, to create seats for these real fancy jets that are privately owned. And then I buy the scraps. But even at a scrap price, it's not super cheap. So let me set this up with this Italian leather, which is dyed a real pretty blue. We'll lay down our zigzag first. And I probably, I've got my upper tension up a little bit already. I'll do that just because it's helpful when you're executing a swing stitch to make sure that you get a good response as far as that lock stitch. So let's go over here. We'll do our zigzag first, and then we'll jump immediately into the decorative ones, and then I'll show you the final product in the end. Alright, so the last one we did was to ponder. The next one is called Springfield. Springfield. Turn this way down. Alright. So we will do a zigzag. Again, I've got cam C in the back of the machine right now. And then we'll do some of the decorative, we'll do all of the decorative stitches on cam C on this Italian leather. Alright, let me get my take-up arm all the way up. Alright, here we go. Go up even a little bit higher on that, I think.
All right, now we're going to be making off camera an adjustment on that stitch length so we can focus on decorative output. So I'm going to be taking that stitch length from where it's at right now at right around 3 all the way down to 0.5. And again, that's going to be that top knob that we looked at that has the reverse button in the middle. So I'm going to take that all the way down to right around 0.5. And now I need to recycle my stitch width off camera, take it down to 0. I'll move my slider into position 4, take my stitch width back to 4, and now we'll do our first decorative sew off, which is going to be stitch number 4 on cam C. All right, here we go. Get my take-up arm all the way up. Making sure I have all my other settings correct. It looks like I do, so here we go. First one we're going to get is going to be kind of a Christmas tree stitch. If I kind of spin it around towards the camera, and if I spin my screen around so I can see what you're seeing, you kind of see what we just generated. Again, that's going to be stitch number 4 on cam C. So now I'm going to recycle my stitch width from 4 down to 0 so I can move the slider to stitch 3 on cam C. And I'll do that off screen. Okay, so now we're going to do stitch number 3 on cam C. I'm really fond of cam C. I like it a lot. Obviously I like cams, all the cams, and I love the stitches on cams D and E as well. And those are really the unicorn cams. You might remember I even sent a cam D to Hans over in Norway because he couldn't find one. And that's right next door to Sweden, so you can imagine how difficult they are to find if you can't find it over there. All right, so this is stitch number 3 on cam C. Here we go. And I could certainly sew faster than I am. I'm just giving it kind of an even rhythmic type sewing speed, but we could certainly sew faster if we wanted to. Just take into account that you're talking about some very intricate sewing, and so I don't like to over rush the machine either, so that it can enjoy the process of laying down some of these gorgeous stitches. All right, so let me clip that one. Now off camera, I'm going to, after getting the material back into place, I'm going to go ahead and recycle our stitch width down to 0, move our slider into position 2, stitch width back to 4, and I'm even going to take our stitch a little bit shorter. I'm just a little bit below 0.5 right now. I'm going to be right between 0.5 and 0.4. So I'm going to see if I can tighten this up even a little bit more on this next stitch pattern. Stitch pattern number 2 on cam C. All right, take up arm all the way up. Here we go. And this needle has gotten quite a workout already. I think you know that with all the sew-offs that we've done and the sew-offs I did off camera as well. And yet it's still delivering just at an incredible level. Look at those gorgeous decorative stitches. Again, this is from cam C. We did the zigzag, we did position 4, 3, 2, and now we have one position left to do on this cam. position 1. And then we'll look at all of these top stitch, lock stitch. But I'm really pleased that this 1959 CI-21A comes with a smaller motor, because a lot of people are so fixated on I gotta have a 1.5 amp motor on my Swedish Beauty. It's not necessary if that motor is running at the top of its game. A 1 amp Swedish motor that I've gone through will run better than another comparable motor that could even be 2 times the size as far as rating. It's just because the quality engineering that the Swedish put into their motors, but also my process as well. So I just turned our stitch width down to 0. I'm going to move our slider into position 1. It's our final decorative stitch on cam C. And I took our stitch width back to 4. Now we're going to lay down this final decorative stitch on what is becoming a very tired size 90 Schmetz universal needle. It's done a lot of sewing, but that's what Schmetz needles are designed to do. All right, here we go. Actually ended in the up position there. That was kind of cool. So this is almost kind of a building block mountain style stitch that we just laid down there. Again, this is position 1 on cam C. So that's position 1. The one over to this side is position 2, position 3, position 4, and then finally our zigzag. So this really, what you're seeing in the shot right now, represents the full cam output of cam C. Everything from the zigzag in position 5 to all the decorative stitches between positions 4, 3, 2, and 1. And Nate's machine just did, wow, just did a fabulous job. And we'll look at those a little bit closer now so you can actually see them as up close and personal as I'm looking at them right now. I'm almost kind of curious what that embroidery style needle that I used on Roz's 301A would have done with a stitch off like this. Because again, a size 90, it's not huge. That's the European equivalent of, oh, what is it, size 14? Let me double check. Yeah, 90 European is a size 14 US. And that's a little bit on the bigger side for decorative sewing. You want to be more in the 70 to 80 range. And yet we still, when you look at these, you're going to be like, holy mackerel, that's incredible stitch quality, stitch definition. And it is. And that's a product of how well Nate's machine is running. See that? I still could have cut more of that off right there. I still have all that empty space, which I'll do right now so I don't waste it. And what I'll do is, so that Nate can goof around with this Italian leather as well, is that other piece I cut off before, I'll include this with Nate's stuff so he can try sewing on this himself. That way I don't take away that opportunity for him. So we're looking at top stitch right now on the bottom. We could flip this either way. If we want to do it in the order that we did it, we would flip it like this, with our zigzag on top and then all the other decorative stitches going down. Why don't we do that? All right, let's look at totality first, because I think that's a lot of fun to do. I think it may have been, I don't remember who said it, but I showed that other sew off, the one that I did off camera on Facebook, and someone had said, that looks like, I mean, that's art. And it really is. When you look at the totality of the stitching, it really does look like art. The intricacy of those decorative stitches for cam C are really quite spectacular. All right, so the next one I'm going to put on while we're looking at these is called Love Aside. Love Aside. Okay, so you see the totality now. Top row, the very top row is the zigzag we did. Then we moved into position 4 with the second one down from the top. Position 3 is the third row down. Position 2 is the fourth row down. And then finally position 1 is the one on the very bottom. This is all of Cam C. This is all of Cam C. So it really gives you an idea of what you could do with a machine like this. I'll just put the other one out here as well so we can kind of look at that with cams A and B into the mix as well. So this is Cam C, and then this one over here I did off camera as a final check and test for Nate's machine. There, that looks familiar, doesn't it? That bottom one right there. Where is it? There I am. That one. And that one. Actually, we just look at those three on the bottom. Those 3 stitches on the bottom right there. Or we could look at the, yeah, all 4 of them. If I stop moving the camera. And then compare it to our Cam C. That's going to be Cam C. See that? So this is only Cam C. Over here, I went crazy. And I did Cam C, Cam B, and Cam A. Actually, I like Cam A quite a bit too, don't you? There's our zigzag, there's our straight stitch we did as well. So absolutely spectacular from a decorative output with this CI-21A. Both the stuff we did live on camera today, and then certainly the more detailed one I did of cams A, B, and C on the lighter cowhide material to the right. So I'm going to throw these both to the back as a pass. And we will move into our final sew-offs for this machine that's heading to Minnesota to my master pottery friend, Nate Saunders. Why don't we do some of this acrylic fiber now? This stuff is nasty. It really does test a machine. Acrylic fiber, again, if you're brand new to this channel, the stuff I just set out there, I'll zoom in on it. You want to talk about an intense field of material to pierce. It's absolutely off the charts because this acrylic fiber is used to make awnings. Awnings are out in the elements, changing of temperatures, direct sunlight, UV stuff, weather, wind, everything you can imagine. This type of material gets hammered with it 24/7. And so when they put this acrylic fiber together, it is like bulletproof. It's like the equivalent of a textile Kevlar material. And I always like to mess around and go through a couple layers of this with one of the machines because it's like sewing patio blocks and sandpaper all at the same time. So let me adjust my shot up a little bit. We'll kind of get right over to here, and we will put Nate's machine to the test with this acrylic fiber stuff. I think I sew 1 or 2 layers. We'll probably do 2 layers on Nate's machine today. And in order to make it easier to see, I'll probably do a modified zigzag. So this is called, the next one we're going to put on is called Broken Drum Machine, and I'll turn the volume way down. Broken Drum Machine. That's kind of a fun title, isn't it? Yeah, it is. Okay, so I don't goof up. I'm going to remember to move my slider down to position 5, so I'm getting an actual zigzag and not one of the decorative stitches. Although doing a decorative stitch on this would be kind of crazy, wouldn't it? Almost kind of tempted by that now. Okay, I'll be good. So let's do a modified zigzag now. I'm going to set us on stitch length right around 2.5, in that range. And I'm going to set us on stitch width right around 3. And we'll go ahead and lay down, and I'm going to see how this is more of a busy side of the material. I'm going to turn it to this side so we can see that stitch a little bit easier. I'll kind of fold it in half like this so we can see it more easily. All right, let's give this a try. This is not easy. It's making me a little bit nervous, but especially as hard as we already worked this needle, but we'll give it a try. So a modified zigzag through 2 layers of acrylic fiber, again, a material that is used to make awnings as a bulletproof outside type of material that's exposed to every element you can imagine. They even use this stuff down in Florida where they have hurricanes. And sometimes the building falls, but the material stands. I'm not kidding you. It's that strong. So let's see how Nate's machine does with this. Not an easy task at all. Here we go. I'm just going to be honest, folks. This stuff makes me nervous. This makes me a little bit nervous. It's not lack of confidence in the machine. It's just like, holy mackerel, this stuff is like bulletproof Kevlar stuff. Here we go. Even when that needle hits it, I mean, being this close to the machine, it hits it and there's like a microsecond of like, you've got to be kidding from that needle. I'm not kidding you. That needle just goes, ugh, ugh. And I am not going to close the box. I could for our box closers. I could do that as a service. We'll do that. I'll close the box for our box closers. All right. I can now breathe. Maybe. And I did turn up our upper tension a little bit. Because of the density of the weave of this stuff, just to try to accentuate that lock stitch a little bit more. And I would use probably a roller foot or the equivalent to sew a ton of this stuff if I were sewing it all the time, just because of the weave is just so intense on this material. Trying to get a consistent lock stitch with it is a real science. Having the adequate presser foot pressure as well is quite a booger. Okay, so let's look at the top stitch first on this. Kind of position it like that. I think we'll be able to see it without me using that thread sew-off holder that Maddie sent me from Florida. All right, let's take a look at these stitches. This acrylic fiber, again, is really tough stuff. Really tough stuff. Especially when you're dealing with a more tired needle. And yet, page 34, folks, on this zigzag. That's my little weird corner there, just ignore that. That is a beautiful zigzag, folks. Through 2 layers of this material that's like basically a Kevlar style material for awnings. There's the totality of the stitching right there. I'm going to go ahead and turn around. We'll look at that lock stitch. The lock stitch always makes me a little bit anxious with material like this because it is just absolutely has a huge propensity to mess with that lock stitch because it's having to suck that thread back up through this real intense weave of this material. We'll see if my increase in upper tension helped us in that factor. Now right there, looking at those are spot on. Looking at this side panel right here. Those are, let me take my hand off the camera. Those are page 34, zigzags. But let's go all the way around and take a look and see what we got.
Absolutely beautiful stitching. Again, with a tired needle going through this stuff, 2 layers of it. Yeah. Let's look at the totality of stitching for this zigzag that we just laid down on these 2 layers of acrylic fiber. Excellent, excellent stitching. Really, really great stitching. So I'm going to give this a pass as well, both for the lock stitch and the top stitch on it. And again, if you're sewing a ton of this stuff, it really is getting that sweet spot for the presser foot pressure. Looking at the possibility of a different presser foot attachment. Like I said, maybe a roller foot to feed this more evenly over the feed dogs. Give you that nice movement of material. Because this stuff is also, along with being Kevlar in style and very difficult to pierce, it's also a little bit slippery too. But this machine today did just a bang-up job on both the lock stitch and the top stitch. So I'm going to throw this to the back as well. This will go with the machine when I send it to Nate. So we are down to basically my commercial upholstery material. So we're going to be focusing on that next. The commercial upholstery material. Let me just modify my shot a little bit here. And I'm thinking about doing something totally crazy and maybe even looking at doing some decorative stitching on this commercial upholstery material. That would be kind of fun, wouldn't it? Okay, so love aside, we did Broken Drum Machine was the last one. And now Sailor's Song. Sailor's Song. Give me just a second here. Okay, had a quick take care of something. Okay, so our final sew-off is going to be commercial upholstery material. So like acrylic fiber, it's going to be designed to withstand incredible wear and intense use. So right away it's going to tell you that it's going to be incredibly difficult to get through. Incredibly difficult to get through. So why don't we make it even more difficult? Let's see here. That's the busier side, that's the flatter side. What should we do on this last one? Maybe some sort of a decorative stitch, huh? Let's see what I can come up with. Okay, so that's 5, 4, 3. Maybe stitch number 2. Stitch number 2 would be a fun one to do on this. Let's try that. Okay, so stitch number 2 is what I'm going to do now on this commercial upholstery material. And I'm going to go a little bit above 0.5 just so that I'm not totally driving this machine crazy as far as the intensity. We're going to be doing 2 layers of this commercial upholstery material. Let's see how this stands up after all the use that this needle has gotten. Let's see if it can finally do this final task of going through 2 layers of this commercial upholstery material all the way around with this decorative stitch number 2 on cam C. I know, it's crazy, but hey, it's fun. Alright, here we go.
right, making another turn. We're almost down to the finish line. Almost down to the finish line. Here we go. And I am going to close the box on this as best as I'm able. Woo. That is a little bit of pretty right there. I'm almost feeling inspired to do something else with the middle now. Feeling inspired to do something else with the middle. We have almost, I would call a little bit of art here. I think it was Pam. Yeah, Pam out of Florida is the one that described the stitching of Nate's machine that I showed on Facebook as art. She's right. It really is. I was trying to remember who said it. That was Pam. Pam, yeah. All right, so let's do one more inner block. I'm going to see what would complement this one. Okay, let's do position 1. The same type of stitch output will go around this on the inner one, and then that'll do it. That'll do it. All right, let me get my take-up arm all the way up. All right, here we go. Really pushing this needle to the max here. Kind of made my turn a little bit early, but that's okay. There we go. That's a little bit better. All right, let's go down to the finish. And the mirrored match, we'll go ahead and close the box on this one too. All right. I do better with straight rows, but this is not, it's not horrible. It's not horrible. Kind of fun. We used what is a very difficult material for heavy use, heavy traffic, and we applied more of an artistic touch to it now, using these decorative stitches on Nate's machine, stitch 2 and 1, to give this a real pretty look. Could almost do one more row on the inside, but I think we'll stop here. I think we'll stop here. Oh, what the heck. Let's do one more. So we did stitch number 1 and 2 on Cam C. Let's see what I want to do. 1 and 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's go ahead and do stitch 3. Yeah, stitch 3, which will give us kind of almost like a bell drop type stitch. Yes, I make up my own names all the time. All the time. Alright, so let's do this bell drop style stitch, and they actually have names for them in the book if you ever want to check them out for kicks and giggles. Alright, so let's do this final stitch around. And you know what I haven't demonstrated, and this would be a perfect opportunity? I haven't demonstrated the slow gear yet on this machine. So let me pull the slow gear out, and if you're brand new to this channel, you engage the slow gear over here by pulling this out on the machine, like so. And by pulling that out, you change the gear ratio of the machine from full power down to 1/5 of the power that the machine normally would do. So it slows it way down with a gear reduction, which gives you a lot better control, which is what I need as I'm getting into this inner core of this sew-off on this upholstery, commercial upholstery material. So you'll be able to hear the motor is running differently. I should say it's running at the same rate of speed, but the machine is not running at the same rate of speed is the best way to try to describe it. All right, here we go. Make sure I have everything set correctly. Yes, I do. So this again is going to be stitch 3 on cam C. The outer row that we already did is stitch 1. Then the next one over is stitch 2. Now we're doing stitch 3 on cam C. Here we go. You see the benefit of that? As we're getting down here, I mean, the benefit is it gives you a huge amount of more control. And then when you're going through the different phases of this, what I do is I kind of disengage the slow gear so that I can move the balance wheel more freely. Otherwise, it kind of locks the balance wheel because of that gear reduction being engaged. So I basically took it out of slow gear. I made my adjustment as far as the needle being rotated down in the material. I reposition my material, then I re-engage the slow gear again. All right, here we go. Making sure it's engaged, yes. So again, we are not increasing power. We are not increasing power, we're simply gearing the machine down so that we have a slower running machine so we have better control. That's what we're aiming for. So what I'm doing now is I'm disengaging the slow gear, and then I'm rotating the needle down, and then we're going to finish closing this final box for stitch number 3 on cam C. So now I'm re-engaging the slow gear, and I'm going to go ahead and finish off this last line of stitching. All right. And I could have made these even a little bit tighter as far as reducing that stitch length more. I was a little bit above 0.5, and I could have gone lower on this to give the stitching a little bit better definition. And that's something you could certainly do, or Nate could do on this machine when he sits down to it and becomes to get acquainted with it. Gets acquainted with the machine and kind of experiments and tests different things and tries different things a little bit differently than I did in this premiere. And that's the prerogative of being the owner. You're going to do some things like I do them, and you'll do other things that are unique to you, your own style. So that's cool. That's totally cool. All right, get that back into position. I'm going to set us back to regular straight stitching. And now we're going to take a look at these really cool decorative stitches that we did. Again, I could have made them a little bit more accentuated by shortening that stitch length, but I elected not to do that in this instance. Just because, I mean, we are going through 2 fairly intense layers of commercial upholstery material, and I've never tried this before, so I'm like, I don't know if I want to push that boundary too far, but maybe I should have. Life's all about calculated risk, right? Yeah, it's calculated risk. Oh, goodness. Okay. I closed one of the windows on here that I didn't want to close. Bear with me for a second. The next thing we're going to look at are some progress shots on Facebook. I'd like you to see what I took the machine through, that it's not just a matter of the machine all of a sudden can do this level of sewing, but there's a very
intentional process that the machine has taken through 126 steps to allow it to be able to deliver at this level. And like I said, no one else in the world does this like I do it. Okay, there we go. I got it back open again. One of my progress photo shots had closed for some reason, probably because it's been open so long. So that last piece we just did, I have no idea because it just rotated all the way to the top. We'll put on Shake next. Shake sounds like a fun song, doesn't it? All right, so again, we've got 2 layers of upholstery material, and we basically created 3 boxes. I think it's 3 boxes. Yeah. This is stitch 1 on the outside. Again, we could have shortened that a little bit more, but I didn't. And stitch 2 on cam C. And lastly, stitch number 3. 1, 2, 3, yep. This is my bell style one where I could have gone shorter and tighter on that, but I didn't. Also, I probably could have tried a smaller needle on that if I really wanted to do some decorative stuff on here. But this is what you get with a size 90, which is size 14 Schmetz universal needle. So the totality of the stitching, yeah, I would call it art. I would call it art just as Pam did. But if I really wanted to refine that art, I would go with a size, probably a size 80 embroidery or universal needle, and I would tighten up that stitch length just a little bit more. Yep, that's what I would do. This is a fun sound. Let's turn around and look at that lock stitch. And again, I've got my upper tension cranked up, so our lock stitch is probably going to be a little bit more poppy, a little bit more pronounced than our top stitch. And we would have to find that sweet balance if we were sewing a ton of this stuff to really get that sweet balance with the stitching. But look at that lock stitch, folks. Page 34. It's a fun song, isn't it? You can hear the little people saying in the background. I shouldn't say little people, maybe they're big people, but saying, hey, hey. Yeah. So again, I mean, there's a number of things I would do. But this is what we did. Stitches 1, 2, and 3 on cam C. And overall, I'm very pleased with them. But to get even more definition, I would do all the things I've already said. Yeah, that's what I would do. Okay, so the totality of the stitching on this, again, this is our lock stitch. The more difficult of the 2 stitches to complete because of the factor of the density of the weave of this commercial upholstery material, the fact that there's 2 layers, so it's having to suck that thread, pull that thread all the way back through those layers, through this tightly woven commercial material that's designed for high traffic and wearability and such. So all in all, I'm very pleased. But I'm also perfectionistic, so I'm always looking at it going, how could I have improved that? Yeah, I could have done that. Yep, yep, yep. But that's now up to Nate to do. Nate can now perfect this Swedish beauty as he becomes more familiar with it, explores, experiments, tries different fun things. And I'll probably put a fresh size 90 in it. So Nate, if you want to step it down a little bit, maybe get some embroidery needles and try that on different materials you're sewing with as well. That would be totally cool. Because this is your baby now. Yes, it is. So beautiful sewing on the part of this Swedish beauty from 1959. I'm going to come out on the shot and kind of revisit the materials that we did during this premiere again, just so you can see that. Then we're going to jump over to Facebook. And we'll play that song one more time. That's kind of fun. It's called Shake, Shake. Yeah. All right, so these won't be in any particular order, not necessarily. Just kind of look and see what we've done. So obviously off camera, I did cams A, B, and C with this sew off here that you've seen and was posted on Facebook. We did, first of all, a single layer of this genuine elk hide, and then we bumped it all the way up to 2 layers of genuine elk hide and delivered some gorgeous straight stitching on this machine. We also did this compressed felt, 3 layers of that. Beautiful stitching. We did this bubblegum material with what was supposed to be a zigzag but turned out to be a different decorative stitch. And this machine did fabulous in managing this real tricky material. We did this Italian leather with all of the stitches that are on cam C. And we already looked at these close up and personal. Everything from the zigzag all the way through stitches 1, 2, 3, and 4. Beautiful job on the part of Nate's machine. This Swedish beauty just really delivered beautifully on that as well. Then we did this 2 layers of upholstery material with decorative sewing, which is a little bit of crazy. 3 different blocks of it, and this 21A did not miss a beat. Fabulous job. Then we did this god-awful acrylic fiber stuff, and we did a zigzag modified all the way around it, and the lock stitch and the top stitch are absolutely spot on. And then this is just an extra piece of the Italian leather that I'm going to give Nate so he can goof around with it as well, maybe doing some decorative stitching on it as well. There you go. So our sew-off sandwich, both on camera and off camera, looks like this. Yeah. And again, I'm not aware of anyone else that, as a final confirmation to allow that machine to leave the workshop, their workshop, will take a machine through this wide scope of materials, thicknesses, material types, types of stitching, and everything else to finally give a final stamp of approval on that machine and saying it's good to go. So that's what I'm doing officially now, is I'm giving Nate's 1959 Swedish Beauty a good to go stamp of approval so that she can get packed up very carefully and sent off to Nate in Minnesota. And I didn't specifically show it, but this is a reprint that I offer. I'm going to be giving this full color reprint to Nate as well as a resource so he can really enjoy the machine even at a higher level. This is basically a color copy of the original that I had professionally bound. And I offer this also on eBay, shameless plug. Or you can contact me directly. And then original accessory container has a combination of all metal bobbins, not aluminum, a brush, original Husqvarna brush, various attachments, a darning plate that could be used if needed, and then cams A and B along with an original Husqvarna oiling bottle, screwdriver, you know, all kinds of little goodies in there for Nate to enjoy the machine even more fully. All right, so let's pop over to Facebook and we can see kind of the process that I took Nate's Swedish Beauty through, so you can appreciate that it just didn't happen like waving a magic wand. It was a very intentional process that the machine had to go through. Should probably get a drink of something too at the same time. All right, so let's go over to Facebook. So you YouTubers that don't Facebook it, you get an extra privilege of seeing what I posted on Facebook in showing the process and the stages that Nate's 1959 Swedish Beauty was taken through. Again, 126 steps. 126 steps. Probably like 127, but who's counting, right? I'm going to put on a little bit of music while I'm getting a drink. Okay, so just starting here, I'm beginning to dig into the machine. Again, my process is very surgical. It's very intense. It goes very deep into the machine. And that's the only way to do it. A lot of these are just kind of showing the different features of the machine at the beginning points. This is the right side of the machine by the bobbin winder and by the motor output. A lot of servicing in this area. Look at how filthy that is in there. And again, this is an original owner machine that was serviced every year, according to the family. But again, they took it to a service center that doesn't use my process. So all of that dirt was just building up inside of the machine over all those years and was never dealt with. So it migrated into the motor, it migrated all over the machine, but no more, because I deal with it with my process. Check this shot real quick. That's all filth. That's all filth and dirt in this Swedish Beauty. See that? That is disgusting. That is not the way a Swedish Beauty should look. And that bobbin assembly that controls the slow gear, it disengages the clutch automatically. It has the long belt and the short belt running over it. Has probably about 22 service points on it that have to be dealt with. And that had never been done during the time that this family owned this machine, but it's done now. Find a camera angle here where I can get the whole thing in there. But you'll be able to see the filth on this, even on this bobbin assembly. And it's because, like I always say, the dirt moves. It's not the dirt stays in one spot and it's good dirt and it stays there. It's nice dirt. Stay dirt, stay. No, it doesn't. It goes where it wants to go. And it builds up on these cogs that are part of that slow gear assembly. And there's springs that get all that build up on there as well. And there's internal springs that allow the release of the clutch. That all gets crudded up. It was awful how dirty this machine was. Look at that. Look at that close. That's not supposed to look like that, folks. Again, this family bought this machine brand new in 1959, but it never went through a process like mine. Because they would take it to a local service center that would spend a half an hour to 40 minutes on the machine. Probably just oiling it. That was about it. Sometimes over oiling it. And the result is you just get so much buildup, the machine was just choking to death. Look at that. All of this is all crud built up on these cogs. Along with all the debris that you pull out of here. It's kind of like checking underneath your couch cushions. Hopefully you don't find a bunch of pins and other crud like that underneath your couch cushions, but your couch cushions, but you find all kinds of other stuff. And that's the same thing when you go through a machine like this. These needles have probably been in here since the 1950s or early 1960s, because no one ever went through the machine surgically like I do. That's the long belt right there that is so glazed over and so filthy and so saturated with crud. It's amazing that the machine got any traction at all. So also part of my process, I put a brand new long belt and short belt on the machine as well, so that it's all set to get the job done for Nate for many, 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 many years. See how nasty that belt is? It's partially dry rotted, it's crudded, it's glazed. It's in an awful state. It's in an awful state. And Lord knows how long the family, if they were using the machine on a regular basis, how long they struggled with the belt slipping, not getting even flow of power. I mean, what you saw the machine do today is the way a machine is supposed to run when it's optimized. There you're looking at a combination of the long belt and the short belt, both of which are in horrible disrepair. That one actually has a break in it. You can see that right there. Now we're starting to pull all that gunk out of there that was migrating around the machine for decades. And you can look at that cosmetic pad and just get an idea of how bad off, how filthy. See that down in there? And that's why the process defines what the machine is. You know, you can't say one CI-21A is going to be the same as another. That stops. That stops when you apply a process like this to the machine. You can see all that gunk on there, here, and that's the side of the motor right there. And type in the chat if you remember what I said a motor does within the machine. What does it act like in migrating dirt? What does it act like? It's another device you'd use in the home, another tool you would use in the home. What does it act like? Type that in the chat. Just continuing to plug away on that scum and that dirt and that buildup in there to get rid of that stuff, so it stops migrating around the machine and sticking like a plaque to everything and just causing the machine to choke to death. So if you said it acts like a vacuum and you typed that in the chat and you were the first one to do it, you get an A in the class, because that's exactly what a motor does. It acts like a vacuum cleaner, and it moves and migrates that dirt all over the place. All over the place. And you can see all the stuff I've been pulling out. Look at those pads. They're just saturated with scum and dirt and buildup. That was being moved all over the machine, contaminating the machine. And here, some of those spots are difficult to get to, so I'm using a dental tool, I'm using other methods to get all of that stuff out of there. Looking at the bottom of the machine now. And I trust that in the time that the family had this machine, that seldom if ever was the machine ever serviced from the bottom. And I base that partly on the length of the carbon motor brushes were worn so far down, and you'll see that in some of the shots, that I think those are probably the original brushes that were on the machine. And you can see again, if you look closely at the top corners, you can see that the pedestal feet of the machine had also degraded to a point with the rubber that Husqvarna used, that it was basically dry rotted. So the machine wasn't getting any support or stability when it was sewing. It was basically just resting almost on the metal. Isn't that, I mean, that's horrible, isn't it? Those are designed to cushion the machine so you get a nice smooth ride, and that cushion is gone. So I'm going to remove those. I'm not going to just ignore them and just say, oh, well, they are what they are. Those are going to get removed, and brand new non-skid type feet are going to be added to all four corners of the machine. See how it's basically cracked cracked and dry rotted. Kind of see my hand there. Gives you an idea of how filthy the environment of the machine is as you start to get into the machine and start to surgically go into levels that the machine has never had service before. So again, I don't know why Husqvarna chose that type of rubber. Everything else of the machine quality is just top shelf. But the rubber that they used on the bottom had a propensity to dry rot and to degrade. I've seen it consistently on Husqvarna's, pretty much everyone that's ever been in the workshop and has needed those feet replaced. They could have chosen a different type of rubber to use, but they didn't. This stuff gets real brittle and kind of disintegrates. You see part of it falling right there. Again, how many times was this machine serviced from 1955 forward, and things like this were never dealt with? They were never even on the radar for these folks that service the machine because they don't use my process. They look at the machine at a real high level. They're looking to service the machine in 30 to 45 minutes so that they can cover all their overhead. I recently had somebody behind the scenes that kind of was critical of me and chastised me a little bit that I don't have a fancy shop. I don't have a super fancy shop. I've got a workshop. Work is the word that I would emphasize on. I don't need a fancy shop with all kinds of fancy lights and display cases and all that. I'm here to do a job. I'm here to do a service. And so I'm not going to apologize for not having a big, huge brick and mortar like some service centers elect to do. That's not my thing. My thing is to offer the best service in the world at a price that's affordable to folks. So here you can see we've gotten a couple of those degraded feet off already. And now what I'm focused on is adding new feet to give this machine the service and support that it needs. So it's a two-stage process. There's a gripper pad that goes on the inside that is fused into that space instead of using a screw like they did originally. Then there's oil-resistant epoxy that's added to that layer, distributed across there. Then I use a heat process to cause that to cure faster, so it's going to adhere with greater strength. If you just let it air dry, it's going to be strong, but it's not going to be as strong, and it's not going to cure as quickly as if you apply heat. So I'm using a torch to superheat this epoxy, and then I'll apply the final gripping pad layer to the top of that. And that's what that gripper pad looks like. And you could put that on the most slippery counter. You could put it on the most slippery table, and that machine is not going to go anywhere. And it's going to absorb the vibration, and it's going to give you a lot smoother ride as you're operating that machine. So I actually think my method is better than the original one, quite honestly. It's a two-stage process, and it doesn't involve the screw, which probably also contributes to that cracking over time, the original one. This one is going to be pressure treated, heat treated, and it's going to last for the lifetime of the machine that Nate has it. Now I'm starting to dig into the bottom of the machine. There's a lot of service points down there as well, including the feed dog drop that oftentimes on machines like this, over time, especially if it's not used a lot, if that person doesn't do a lot of free motion quilting and doesn't use the use of the feed dog drop, it's going to get stuck and build up in there, especially with all the gunk that was in the machine migrating around the machine and sticking to everything. Here again, I'm just finishing up the feet on the bottom of the machine. I kind of bounced around a little bit, using a dental tool to get in there and clean out all the debris. So I've got a nice clean surface to apply the new feet to. And there we have the machine with 4 brand new pedestal feet added to it. So it doesn't have that vibration factor anymore. It doesn't have that slip factor. It's brand new. It's brand new. And I actually, again, I think my design is better than what the factory came up with, because these are not going to get brittle. They're not going to degrade. They're not going to fall apart like the other ones. Almost looks like a waffle. I'm kind of getting hungry now. So now we're looking at part of that feed dog drop assembly, which is spring controlled on the bottom of the machine. A lot of moving portions of that, and a great propensity to get stuck and to gum up and to not function properly. So you're going to see me going in there and disassembling that, deep cleaning it, servicing and lubricating it properly, and getting it back to full function. And there's a variety of different tools involved in doing that. And it's a real tight space. It's really awkward. You got to be real patient as you're doing it, otherwise you drop stuff inside of the machine. Because again, you'll see there are a number of different components to it. Also, since it's been sitting like that, it's been sitting like that since it was new in 1959. I've got to use my torch as well to loosen up some of those portions so that they don't potentially break when I take them off. There's part of the spring assembly. There's a piston that controls the feed dog drop, and it's got a number of notches, and you have to really, really get into that thing to get it nice and clean so it can move freely within that assembly and do its job properly. Kind of a neat little piece, isn't it? I think it's super cool. Again, the Swedish are incredibly smart folks, and they very thoughtfully designed everything about the machine that is now going into Nate's personal collection. Except for the feet. I think they kind of missed the mark on the feet, don't you? So I'm using a combination of power tools, dental tools, and other things like that to clean all of that assembly. A lot of little nooks and crannies on it. You see all that on there? All that buildup? Here on the set bolt as well, the spring, the piston. It just shows you how gunked up that thing is. And it was pretty much frozen when I got the machine from this family. More cleaning. Also, like I say a lot, certain parts of a machine should be lubricated, certain parts of the machine should be dry and clean, and you got to know which is which. If you lubricate the wrong thing, that mechanism that otherwise would work doesn't work properly. See all that varnishing and buildup on there? That's all part of that assembly. Gives you an idea of just how dirty the machine was. And if you have a Swedish Beauty, I'm guessing yours probably looks pretty much like this as well. Because if you've been taking it into a local service center or trying to service it yourself, I know for sure you haven't done a 126-step process like I do. We're starting to attack that stuff. It's like a plaque. It's like going to the dental office. That dentist, I mean, he or she is going to go after anything that's going to be harmful to your teeth or your gums. And that's the same thing here when it comes to all this buildup and dirt and grime and grease and old varnishing and everything else. You got to get rid of it all. Does that look different? Yeah, it looks different. And more importantly, it doesn't just look different, it functions differently too. That is a machine that is starting to be able to breathe again. It's starting to be able to breathe. That's the way it should look. Excuse me. And again, certain parts of this need to be dry, certain parts need to be lubricated. This particular area needs to get some lubrication. And also the lubricant that I use also has rust inhibitors in it as well. So it's also going to retard the buildup of varnishing and rust from returning to the machine again too. Here also you can see part of that feed dog drop component does require grease as well. So I'm also applying some grease to it also. My special pink grease. Or I think as Emma calls it, my secret sauce. And then you have to assemble all this, and like I said, trying to put this back in without dropping the spring, without dropping the tiny little bolt that holds it in place and getting it positioned, because you're having to work it into that piston and resist the tension of that spring while you're getting it positioned and aligned properly. It's a booger, but it's something I'm not going to skip over because it needs to be done. Distant shot, just a busy workbench. Showing you just the side of the machine, and probably also did a little bit of cleanup on the paint as well at that stage, just to kind of get some of the varnishing off of the paint as well. Get some of that beautiful luster back. And I think we've gone full circle, haven't we? We looked at that already, didn't we? Yeah, we've already looked at this. I don't know why. Normally it'll just loop back, but it didn't loop back, so. All right, let's go to the next photos. So here you're seeing the back of the machine, kind of the motor area. I'm starting to address some of the motor issues as well, which were abundant because, again, all of that grime and junk in the environment of the machine had been sucked in by the motor. So that motor needed a lot of attention, a lot of love. Here I'm starting to, I do a number of spot checks too on screws and bolts and other things like that that, you know, need to be generally cleaned, but also making sure that they're at the proper torque and that they're not loose. I've come across some machines, almost like the customer was testing me, where a number of bolts and screws on that machine, not necessarily a Husqvarna, maybe a Singer, have been loosened, as if they're trying to, I wonder if Scott will catch this. So, I did. Here again, checking electrical points. This is the main on switch on the rear of the machine for the light. It does not turn on the power. Don't be, you know, I've seen that posted in some Facebook groups. People don't get it right. They say if you want to operate the machine, you got to turn that switch on. That machine is wired hot all the time. So even if you don't turn that switch on, if you plug in your foot controller and hit the gas, you're going. So just be ready for that. And that information, while you could say, well, okay, it's incorrect, but what's the big deal? It's a big deal because what if you have your hand near the presser foot or near the needle, assuming that the machine is not powered up, assuming that it's not live, that it's not active, and you somehow bump that foot controller? You're going to get a serious injury. So that information that is somehow propagated in some of these Facebook groups is dangerous information because it's incorrect and it could cause somebody to get seriously injured. Even somebody experienced. You remember the gentleman that I interviewed from the East Coast? Give me a second. Frank Wilson. Frank Wilson that worked for Singer. Check the channel if you haven't seen that interview. It's a fascinating interview. I interviewed Frank Wilson. He worked at Singer. He toured some of the plants in Elizabethport, New Jersey. He might have also visited the Anderson, South Carolina plant. I don't know. But he also had his own Singer store as well. So that's a real cool interview to check out. It's in the playlist of VIP interviews that I've done on my channel if you haven't seen that with Frank Wilson. But Frank Wilson, being an incredibly experienced technician and a Singer guy, got a serious injury one time as a result of that very same thing, where he thought the machine was not live, was not active because the switch was not on, and he bumped the foot controller and he got a serious injury to his hand. So even somebody experienced, it can happen to them, let alone somebody less experienced that's taking bad advice from some of these Facebook groups that I get invited to all the time, and I just say thanks but no thanks. Because I know I probably would be loved and hated at the same time because I would be challenging all of these incorrect propositions that people are peddling through those groups all the time. I'm just saying it like it is, folks. So here I'm checking electrical contacts. I'm cleaning copper contacts to make sure that they're clean of veneer and any other debris. Copper does not carry a charge as effectively when it's filthy, so all of that has to be addressed. Checking the motor pulley output shaft as I'm servicing the motor, making sure it's aligned correctly, that it's the correct distance from the inner stem, and that it's going to drive that belt straight and true, not slightly off canty where it's going to wear that belt prematurely. And also cleaning the pulley as well. Pulleys need to be cleaned because they're going to have that same junk and buildup on them. This is our free arm. Blah! I need to drink again. This is our balance wheel area, and you can see that there's an inner peg that the balance wheel slides over on this particular Husqvarna model. It's true of a lot of the Husqvarna models, and they do that so it slides on the inside of the balance wheel and it gives better positive traction. But that also needs to be removed and cleaned as well, because that's all covered in varnishing and gook as well. Ah, there we go. I got another drink. And also you need to make sure, if you decide to change the long belt yourself, that you get that balance wheel aligned correctly and slid back over that pin correctly when you're putting it back into position. Just kind of showing again. There's the balance wheel. Continuing to clean. I'm a cleanaholic when it comes to machines, I'll tell you that right now. There's the back panel on the machine. That's got a bunch of junk built up in it as well. See all that? That's probably from the 1950s, early 1960s, all that junk in there. Because again, when they took it to that service center and they paid their probably originally like $90. Then later on, as they were getting the machine serviced, $125, $130. None of this is done. And my complete 126-step process is only a little bit more than what these guys and gals are charging in the service centers. Getting the body of the machine cleaned up underneath that plate as well. Not just ignoring the dirt, but dealing with it. You can see that cosmetic pad is evidence of what that machine had caked all over it. Doesn't that look better? And that's out of sight, out of mind. That plate's going to go over the top of it. You can shine the outside of that plate all day long, but that dirt underneath it that I mitigated was still sitting there, still being migrated around the machine. Not anymore. That's the way it should look. Some of these are out of sequence. That's when it was really dirty. Kind of went from clean to back to dirty again. It's kind of, what happened? No, they're out of sequence. Welcome to Facebook. And also these inner cavities as well have to be cleaned as well, because a lot of these are adjacent to the faceplate where there's a lot of moving parts, and also adjacent to the light assembly as well, which is electrified. Doesn't that look better? That's the after. Probably see it dirty again because these are out of sequence. There you can really see the filth that I had to get out of there. Almost like you can see little things crawling in there. Yeah, these are totally out of sequence. These are at the beginning when it was dirty. We already saw it. It's already been clean, and now we're seeing it dirty again, so you're kind of seeing them out of order. Oh well. And now I'm lubricating some of the inner parts of the rear of the machine where the cam stack is and everything. There's also a number of integrated worm gears. There's shafts. There's everything else that has to be stripped clean. Some of it left clean and dry. Other parts lubricated. Some needs oil. Some needs grease. That needs grease. Yeah. And that's a screwdriver. In order to reach into those crevices of those worm gears more easily, I'm using a screwdriver to apply the special grease that I make. And again, we're seeing this on a sequence now. Now we're seeing it, we saw it with grease, and now it has no grease. What happened to the grease? These are out of sequence too. More cogs, more wheels. Some of them have timing gears on them and timing belts, and those need to be cleaned as well. Along with the pitman arm assembly that goes up and down. The bobbin assembly. And again, the sequence of photos, I don't know if this is before or after. It looks like it's been cleaned a little bit. Yeah, this is after. All that crud and stuff on there has been removed. It's been lubricated. It's been greased where it needs to be greased. That's actually the new owner of the machine right there. That's Nate. And Nate is working on one of his pots, or one of his pottery pieces, I should say, in his shop in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And he did attend St. John's. I saw that on his profile. Yeah, that's Nate. Hey, Nate! So, and now this is one of the retainers on the motor for motor brushes, which also has a copper field and needs to be cleaned as well. All part of the process. Motor brushes are a tricky thing. They can either be too long with the carbon stack and not have enough reverse spring tension so that they tend to slide away from the commutator, and you'll get sometimes where you have to turn the balance wheel to engage the motor. That's because the motor brush is not making even contact with the electrical field, and the stack is either too tall or the spring has lost its springiness. So I make sure that the carbon stack is the correct height, and then also that the spring has the right return pressure pressing that carbon stack into the commutator. And that all requires very specific caliber, mechanical caliber type measurements. More cleaning on the motor. More cleaning. Also flushing the motor as well. Sopping up all that grease. Here you can see I've gotten most of it cleaned up. Here in the back, it's still all over the place. Slowly the motor is starting to get the rebirth that it needs, being free of all that crud and grease and everything. Again, this is going to be covered by the plastic cover on the back of the machine, so a technician that this family would have taken this machine to faithfully, paying a good wage to these individuals to service the machine completely, some of them even claiming that they're deep cleaning the machine, they never did. You can see all the crud. Some of this is rust built up on the back here as well. That was never dealt with during the course that this family paid these local service centers to do a great job on the machine, and they did a very high level, superficial type service of the machine. Here I'm using a special solution to flush the motor out a little bit. If I can get a proper response from the motor, if I can mitigate the areas that need to get mitigated, I don't always have to completely tear the machine motor down as you've seen me do. I kind of use that judgment, my 20 plus years of experience. I can tell whether it's going to need it or not. And some of the motor was disassembled, some of it was not. Here again you're seeing a comparison between the two motor brushes, which tells me again that this in all likelihood is going to be the original motor brush. The one on the right, that short little stubby thing, and then the one on the left that I replaced the old one with. These again are out of order. That's the motor when I first took the cover off. It was just caked with scum and buildup and varnishing and dirt and just bleh. This is before as well. You can see all the buildup around here, here, crossed here. Even on the stators. The stators are also caked in all kinds of dirt as well. There you're looking down into the motor brush well towards the commutator, and you can see the commutator as well is just covered in varnishing. And again, that's going to inhibit the electrical flow. These are the bottom panels, the main panel, then also the smaller panel that goes over the motor brush access to the bottom, and those are also just caked in scum and dirt. The bottom assembly where that area I was working quite a bit in returning the function of the feed dog drop, and also cleaning the belts as well. Even the scum built up here in the screws, you can just see how filthy the machine was. And in some of these areas, Husqvarna wanted to have kind of a reservoir oiling, kind of a universal oiling, so they have these little pads that also have to be cleaned and then re-lubricated with the proper oil again. Again, spot checks on all of the screws, vibration, time, and everything else can loosen screws so that they're not at the proper torque. And some have to just be checked to see that they're even properly anchored in place. More checks. Distant shot, busyness. Hi, there's Umi. Hi, Umi. More checks, more cleaning. We may have gone full circle, it's hard to tell. A lot of tiny little screws on the back of here too that have to be checked. I've found wires sometimes that are hanging out from them. They have to be repositioned. Just a lot of careful attention to detail. A lot of careful attention to detail. I think we've gone full circle. Yeah, we have, I think. Yep. So I'm going to close that one and we'll go on to our final one. So now we're over in the free arm area of the machine, and we're focused on a number of things in the free arm area, which is also adjacent to the raceway area, as I refer to it, the kind of the brain center of the machine where the stitch is created. And you'll see me going through a lot of deep cleaning and servicing in that area as well. How does that look? Not too good, does it? The raceway area on the Husqvarnas, in part because of the jam-free feature of it, have a number of paper-thin aluminum wafer spacers that are behind here, and each one of them was just caked in varnishing, rust, and buildup. And you'll see that as we go through these shots. I'm basically peeling this area off, which is off the main output shaft down in the raceway area, layer by layer by layer, and mitigating all of the dirt, filth, and varnishing and rust. How does that look? Not too good, does it? No. And obviously that was never, ever dealt with by any of the service centers that this family took this machine to over the years. They don't have the time and they don't have the knowledge, quite honestly. Distant shot. You can kind of see me on the right side of the shot there, leaning in, using my magnifiers so I can really see the detail of what I'm working with, because it's a tight space, it's a small space, and the more I can magnify it, the better I can do. We're starting to chip it away, almost like plaque. Here you can see we're starting to make headway. Over here, it's still real evident how messed up that inner core of the raceway area is. Starting to make some progress there. You're starting to see it transformed and looking the way it's supposed to be looking. It's heading that way. There's one of those little wafer spacers right there. And depending on the model, there's anywhere from 1 to 3 wafers. On this one, there's 3. And they're incredibly fragile. You've got to be incredibly careful with them. Otherwise, you'll bend them in some way, you'll distort them in some way, and then they're not going to spin true on that raceway with that hook assembly. So you got to be really, really careful. And yes, they do need some lubrication as well. Continue to plug away. This is probably layer 2, I want to say. There you can see the 3 wafer thin spacers over here, the hook assembly right here, the tiny little bolts that hold them in place, and then finally the mounting portion of it right here that also has to be cleaned as well. There's a clearer shot of them. And again, those are, I mean, they are super duper thin. You got to really handle them almost like an eggshell if you decide to take this on yourself. And also they have to go in a special sequence too. They look identical, but they're not. I think we're down to the mounting base, also mitigating the mounting points as well, which are filthy. Feed dogs probably had never been cleaned in the life of the machine. It's looking better, isn't it, right there? This. Looks a lot better than it did. And it just goes to show you, when you're looking from the top of the machine, when the machine is fully assembled and you're using it, you can only see the top edge, kind of like the tip of the iceberg. You can only see the top edge of the feed dogs clearing the throat plate area as they pass through and are pulling that material either forward or back. You can't see all the stuff underneath, and this is kind of what I'm revealing here as I work into those spaces that have probably never been cleaned and pull all the crud and buildup out of there. It's kind of shocking. And that does affect how those feed dogs can function. See all that? And that's where, again, these Facebook groups that propagate a lot of this misinformation, they talk about just take a brush and brush the top of the feed dogs off. That's enough. It's not. It's not, especially depending on the materials you're sewing with that tend to leave a lot of debris behind. You got to go a lot deeper than that. Otherwise, the effectiveness of those feed dogs is being compromised by all this crud and stuff getting into that space. There we're starting to make some headway. More headway, more progress. Now it's starting to look like it's supposed to look. Especially for a Swedish beauty, for goodness sakes. It's a Swedish beauty! It should be clean, it should be lean, it should be a fighting machine. Or a sewing machine. And there we're making a lot of progress as well, but you can see now my focus is going up towards the needle bar and the presser foot bar, which are also very filthy. See that? So that also has to be dealt with as well. That's looking better. Yeah, it is. And a combination of that is scraping, but again, when you scrape metal, you make it vulnerable, because inevitably when you're removing these layers and layers and layers that have built up on this metal over decades, you're going to create a little bit of an inroad into that metal that's going to leave it vulnerable. So you have to then treat that metal with something that's going to keep that rust and that varnishing from coming back, and also protect that metal and fill those pores in that you may have created in the cleaning process, so that it's not going to be vulnerable to either getting rust again or in some other way being compromised. So that's what I'm doing now, is I'm basically safeguarding that metal from getting the return of that, and also filling in those little microscopic spaces that I've created through the cleaning process. Look at those feed dogs down below. Those are just, wow. Yeah, they are. And see, when you work over that metal after you've cleaned it, what looks like clean metal is not really super clean metal. Some of the stuff is still on there, and then by using that solvent to protect the metal, you're also taking off that last little bit of buildup that doesn't need to be there. Those little microscopic, tiny little discs, little wafer discs. They almost look like phonograph records, don't they? Yeah, a little bit. If some of you younger folks don't know what I'm talking about with phonograph records, Google it. Yeah, Google it. Actually, phonograph records are kind of on the rebound now. Vinyl, as they call them, so I guess I shouldn't assume that you don't know what that is. Here's part of the hook assembly. It's really the retainer that the hook goes into, and I'm also cleaning that up as well. Front and back. And the only way you can get to the back is to take it off. So I think we're starting to get where we need to be. Now we're ready to put it back together. Well, almost. Got another one of those little wafer discs to take care of. There, that's looking better. There, now I think we're getting, unless they're out of order again, then it's going to get dirty all over again, which would be, oh, what happened? And there's the inner mount point that all of the rest of this stuff goes onto. And that's also filthy. And that's like 4 layers down. Do you think that that was ever done at those service centers that this family paid good money to over the years? No, never, never. Plus I don't show it in the shots, but there's also a bearing pack behind here as well that I have to dig deeper into the machine to take care of. There we go. That's looking more like a Swedish beauty. There's the entire free arm looking a lot cleaner than it did before. There's where I'm talking about the you got to really get this down to a science when you're putting this hook assembly back together. You got to get it right, otherwise you'll throw the timing off on the machine. Hey, we magically put it back together. That was quick. But now you have to, because there's multiple layers underneath it, you've got to gently nudge those wafers into place so that everything lines up like it's supposed to. You'll see me doing a little bit of that. There's the nudging process. And now I'm using a drill, as one person astutely pointed out. They said, hey, that's not a DeWalt drill. I said, no, but if DeWalt sends me a drill, I'll use it. That happens to be a Black & Decker drill, but I'm using the torque feature of that to make sure that the screws that hold that entire hook assembly together are at the proper torque, that they're not over-torqued or under-torqued. Oh boy, that looks happy, doesn't it? Doesn't that look happy? You know what? I never ring the bell. I'm going to ring the bell because it's so happy. Yeah. And again, even in the grooves on the screws is another part of the process that I do to get all of that junk out of there. I don't want to leave anything behind. And another screw that I'm checking the tightness of. On the rear of the free arm, there's a combination of Teflon, worm gears, and gears. And some need to be dry, some need to be lubricated with a grease. And that's kind of what I'm doing now. And this is the main spin-up region of the rear of the raceway, and that's why I'm packing that with grease as well. But you don't want to leave a lot of excess grease, so some of the extra stuff, once it's packed, I remove that again. Because otherwise you're just making a messy area. And again, as I've said, some needs grease, some needs oil. Some areas need a combination of both. There's part of the free arm cover, and that also has to be cleaned as well. And also on the inside of the free arm area near the pillar, there's a portion where, a rubber boot basically, where the top and the bottom half of the free arm portions join together. And that also needs to be cleaned because that was also incredibly filthy. See that on the Q-tip swab? And that's, I think, only the first swipe. Some of it's a little bit more stubborn, so I use my typewriter brush. I love that typewriter brush. Yes, I do. See all that junk we're getting rid of? Yeah. And then we're starting to put the free arm back together. Bottom portion first, and then the top portion. And a little, I guess, a little hack, little tip for you, is when you get that top portion on, you'll want to put the throat plate in place first with the 2 screws to get that lined up properly and flush, and then bring the bottom portion up to that. Otherwise, you'll have it where that throat plate is not sitting evenly and recessed. It'll be up a little bit and it'll create issues. So, more cleaning. More cleaning. Yeah, that's looking better. Yeah, it is.
There's our throat plate right there. And our feed dog cover. Hey! Now we're into the faceplate area. Starting to address some things there. That was quick. Boy, am I fast. I might ring the bell again. Hold on. Yeah. I think these are my final shots. I'm just showing the side of the machine and kind of like a victory dance as we mitigated a lot of issues on the machine. Yeah, and that's the very beginning again. We went full circle. So, Just Dance. Okay, so I'm going to come off the tripod. Thank you for your patience. I know it's been a long premiere. Well, we covered a lot of important stuff, didn't we? Yeah, we did. So this again is Nate's Swedish Beauty. She is a looker. Not to mention she sews like a dream. She's cleaner than a whistle. I didn't know whistles were clean, but apparently they are. And she's ready to get the job done for Nate. So let's kind of walk around her a little bit. Also, we'll show you, if you're brand new to the channel, inside of the faceplate. This right here is the adjuster for presser foot pressure. The more you rotate this so it pushes that spring up, the spring right here, the more presser foot pressure you're going to have. And then this also has a quick release right there, the one that has little teeth on it. So you can push that in, slide something real thick underneath the presser foot if it won't clear, and then you re-engage it by pushing these two together again. I've shown that before. Oh, and also I'll just show you real quick, the serial number is right there. And the M series serial number is from 1959. Yep. All right, well, Your Majesty, another one of your children is getting ready to leave, but to a very nice young man in Minneapolis, Minnesota, Nate, who does pottery work as well, and is going to love this Swedish Beauty to death. I know he will. All right, well, thank you so much for attending this premiere and your attentiveness of being a great student. I'm going to now ring the bigger bell to end the class. All right, y'all, stay safe in sewing and watch for other great premieres like this. God bless.